Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. On this podcast, we talk about all things to increase performance, add muscle, improve body composition, and do all this in a flexible framework without destroying your health. Today on the podcast, my good buddy, Dr. Guillermo Escalante, and we are chatting about some really cool stuff. A two-part series here. We're talking about the compound GAA. Is this the next creatine? Now, again, you've probably heard about everybody making claims about this form of creatine, this supplement's the next creatine. Well, it turns out GAA is sort of a precursor to creatine and may have some other super interesting benefits. I've been following this work on GAA for quite some time. Shout out to my buddy Dave Barr. Man, probably a decade and a half ago, he was the first guy who ever mentioned this to me. And I've just been one of those things in the background. I sit around and read research for fun. So I've been keeping my eye on that. I did a research review on it for the Carrick Institute this past year in their neuro research review. So if you want full details on that, was one of the studies that was included there. But I wanted to get Dr. Escalante here to talk about GAA. Is it the next creatine? What is it? What are some of the potential benefits? What do we know? What do we not know? We also talked about the supplement industry just overall. Is the supplement industry regulated or not? So I'll make you listen to the podcast for that answer. And then we switched up and we started talking about the enhanced games, which is coming up pretty fast. What exactly is it? How are they going to look at health and performance metrics? What are they really trying to do? What are some of the potential changes that could happen in terms of regulation of drugs and PEDs? What are even the kind of ethics of doing something like that? So really fun conversation. Huge thanks to him for coming down to the podcast. Make sure to check out all of his great stuff. We'll put a link to his Instagram below, which is always constantly sharing great stuff. And then both of us will be at the International Society of Sports Nutrition Conference. If you are around or want to go to that, I would highly recommend it. If you're interested in exercise physiology, nutrition, sports supplementation, great conference. Probably one of my favorites of the year. I think I've only missed 2 years in 16 years or something like that. So I'm not presenting this year, just hanging out, getting to chat with everyone there. And we also have a sponsorship here from Element. If you're interested in tasty electrolytes, check them out below. It is an affiliate link. And then also my friends over at Tecton Ketones. So if you're looking for a way to bump your ketone levels up without having to do a ketogenic diet, I would highly recommend you check them out. They've got some really cool stuff coming out very soon. As soon as it is public knowledge, I will share all of that with you. But look for some cool stuff from them around probably the June time frame. So thank you so much for listening. As always, if you want more information from me, you can get onto the Insider newsletter. I'll put a link to it down below. And enjoy this podcast with Dr. Guillermo Escalante. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you today, Doc?
I'm doing great, Mike. It's been a minute since we chatted on here, but thank you for inviting me back. I think this is my third time on here, and
I think so. Yeah.
I appreciate the shows that you put together and all of the information that you put out. So I'm glad that you were willing to invite me back on your podcast.
Oh, no, of course. And I got to chat with you a little bit at ISSN this past year, which is always a fun time. And I always feel like whenever I go to that meeting, I have some really amazing conversations, learn a lot. And then I always feel like there's people I just didn't talk to much at all. Unfortunately.
It's funny because it's a great conference because there's not a ton of people, but it's big enough where there's enough people that you never get to talk to everyone, especially. Yeah. And once you're like us, there's so many people and you really have some sort of relationship with a lot of the individuals. So you spend 10 minutes talking to someone and you're like, that wasn't enough time.
Yeah. And one of the things we chat about there, which is the first part of the podcast, and then we'll probably transition into some stuff with the enhanced games, is there's a compound called, the acronym is GAA, and it's been getting, I would say, showing up a little bit more in the literature to maybe enhance creatine. And everyone is obviously listening to this familiar with creatine monohydrate and all the different applications. And it seems like over the years, there's been two things. Like one, Ooh, anything that could potentially enhance creatine, which we'll talk about. There's not really a lot to enhance for muscle, but maybe for neuro applications, there might be some stuff there. And then everyone's looking for the next latest and greatest supplement that is the next creatine. And yeah, there's stuff that's effective, but I don't think it's like we're going to turn over the research review every month and find a new compound similar to creatine. So what are your thoughts about GAA? What is it, and how did you get interested in it?
Yeah, so I think it's a very interesting compound. And the way I got interested in it, I was a high retained as a creatine expert for a big case in a lawsuit. And as a result, I had to write a lot of information, over 200 pages worth of information, digging into the creatine research literature, and coming across that some of the things we were talking about were creatine precursors. And that's what guanidinoacetic acid is, a GAA. It is a creatine precursor, and it's your body can actually convert it, produces it naturally, and then it'll actually convert GAA into creatine once it's methylated in the liver, and then your body can actually create creatine. But when you read some of the literature with the GAA supplementation, a lot of it has been done by Dr. Ostajic, who's a big creatine expert, and he's actually leveraged a lot of the GAA and led a lot of the GAA studies. And when you read some of the literature, it's very interesting. It's actually been used for many decades.
It's been around for quite a while.
Yeah, with livestock, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they use it for them to beef them up a little bit, and with chickens. And that's where you see some of the literature with the GAA literature. But over the last few years, you actually see it. You see some case studies, or not case studies, some randomized controlled trials in humans where you see GAA supplementation. And one of the advantages of the GAA over creatine is, number one is creatine demand is super high right now. So there's a lot of demand. As a result, prices are up, and it's relatively expensive compared to some of these other compounds. And it's definitely increased in price over the years.
But it used to be cheap for a while. Like for a while, it was like dirt cheap, and now it's just kind of keeps escalating, just like protein. Oh my God, a protein isolate now is. I looked at some of the prices just for raws the other day, and I was like, holy crap.
Yeah, it's gone up a lot. And GAA, it's a much cheaper version of that. So you can actually get it for about a third or a fourth of the cost. And again, it is not creatine. It's not creatine monohydrate, but if you actually provide the body with GAA, your body can actually, some of the studies have actually shown that increasing GAA within the bloodstream over time, your body will actually convert and methylate that GAA into creatine, and then have some of the same functions as the creatine. But instead of supplementing with the creatine monohydrate, for example, you would supplement with the GAA. And then some studies have actually shown that GAA supplementation can actually increase muscle creatine stores, which is basically the same thing that creatine monohydrate will do. It just does it differently through a mechanism. So as I said, GAA is converted to creatine in the liver through methylation, and it requires a particular compound called S-adenyl methionine, which is called SAM. And then this is what can actually increase that. And then once it changes into creatine, some of the other things that it does is basically very similar to creatine monohydrate. So it's going to increase energy production, regenerating ATP, which is going to have some of the same benefits for high intensity exercise, short duration activities. It will then enhance energy availability. It can support muscle protein synthesis. And then we see some of the other same benefits with growth. So that's basically in a nutshell how it works. And we actually see some of the literature with the animals, and we actually see them gaining lean mass over time with GAA supplementation. And of course, one of the benefits of feeding the animals this is because it's a dirt cheap supplement. So farmers can use it, and now they can actually get more profitability for their animals, because they're actually able to get the animals to be a little bit bigger. So each animal will actually can be sold for more. I'm not sure how sales work in farming, but it would be the same thing. You're going to have a bigger animal. It's going to produce more meat, which is going to be a higher profit margin.
Yeah. And I think they even have like different efficiency ratings and stuff for different compounds, and how much the cost is versus how much more it adds to the animal. And then you can show this compound was very cheap and added whatever percentage to the weight of the animal. So if you resell it, then you get that amount more from just a pure financial standpoint.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's In terms of what we're talking about, it's essentially a pennies game, right? It's a penny business. So you're doing it by the volume, right? So you had millions of volume over pennies. That turns into a lot of money over time. And some of the other interesting things like creatine, higher creatine levels, it may actually stimulate that satellite cell activation and myogenic growth. Although again, more research is needed to confirm some of these effects over time. But interestingly, one thing that you want to be careful with GAA, because GAA requires this methylation to convert to creatine. One of the concerns is that excessive supplementation may actually decrease methyl donors like SAM, and it may lead to other side effects like elevated homocysteine levels. So one of the things that we want to look at and need to study further is, does GAA supplementation, does it increase homocysteine levels? And if it does, to what amount, and is it still within a safe level? So I think the safety profile is something that needs to be looked at a little bit further. But it's a very intriguing compound because it is a creatine precursor. It does work in a lot of the literature. There's a lot of positive trials. But the one thing that I will say is the research doesn't show that it's necessarily better than creatine monohydrate, which is what we find with a lot of these other creatine type products, that even if they work, a lot of them, some of the other compounds have been shown in some research studies, like they're not really effective or as effective. But the ones that are as effective as creatine monohydrate, they're either as effective or slightly less effective, and they cost more. The one benefit to this one is that theoretically it could cost less because it costs less to make it. So you may have the same benefit for less money with this guy here.
Yeah, I had in my head, I was trying to figure out if you combine it with other things that help with the methyl donation so you don't have that issue. It sometimes almost ends up being a wash depending upon what you can get those other ingredients for, which is interesting. But supplement companies, maybe for better or worse, I would imagine, could sell it just as a standalone without the other compounds in it, and then you're left with, in higher doses, you can run into some methylation issues and elevated homocysteine, which wouldn't be good.
Exactly. And I think that's something to be considered. So you can do it with diet, right? You just have something that's more, but supplements like beta-ine or folate can actually help in that regard. And the dosage for the GAAs, the recommended amount typically is about 1.5 to 3 grams per day, which is the recommended amount. And then your body will convert that, and then that can saturate the muscle creatine levels. But I think there haven't been a lot of human studies, so I think it's a very interesting supplement. But the studies that have been done, for the most part, do show some promise, which is interesting.
Yeah, and similar to you, for fun, if I'm looking at pure hypertrophy and body comp, I look at a lot of livestock research. If I'm looking at pure performance, I look at horse racing research.
Oh, right. Isn't that the truth? It's
like, you're trying to find esoteric stuff that may not even be out there, because both those industries, there is actually a fair amount of research. Now, granted, it's in horses and cows and not humans. And like the horse racing industry generally is drug tested. You could argue about the efficacy of that or not. They have a lot of money, so they'll spend the money to run the studies to see what's actually working or not. And then with horse racing, and even like with livestock, it's all weighed. It's all timed. So like you have an actual hard outcome, and it can make some stabs at efficacy then too.
Absolutely. And that's an interesting point that you make, is that with regards to creatine, you would think that creatine actually helps horses, right? But we know that it doesn't, because the horses don't have the creatine transporter to
which is weird.
Which is really weird, right?
I've never understood that. Do you know why that is? I can never wrap my brain around that.
No, I just know one of the original studies that was done by Dr. Harris, who just recently passed.
I know. He was like the nicest dude too. Not only
I know, I never got to meet him in person, but I've read of all his work. Well, I shouldn't say all his work, but a lot of his work.
Super humble. Like I had to coerce him for 15 minutes for me to get a picture with him. He's no one cares about me. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like creatine, like alanine, like you're the dude. He's like, no, don't take my picture.
Yeah, he's a legend. When he looked at one of those studies, he did it on a horse, and they were looking at creatine and the effects of creatine. It's an older study, and it's one of those interesting things. Like, if this is what I always say, just because something doesn't work in one study doesn't mean you should stop looking at it
Oh
and
yeah.
completely disregard it, right? Because some people look at this. So he was looking at the effects of creatine on a horse, and they were looking at, does it increase muscle creatine stores? And they were feeding this horse the creatine, and nothing happened. And then that was, well, I guess creatine must not work. It doesn't saturate muscle creatine stores. But then come to find out, it's okay, well, in the horse, it doesn't work. The human, it actually does, because we actually have that creatine transporter to be able to. And of course, there are different types of creatine transporters that we have. And I'm definitely not an expert into what those specific transporters, but your body has different types of these transporters. And I know that to be able to saturate muscle creatine stores, you definitely need a creatine transporter, which is important. And of course, there's some in the muscle, there's some in the brain, which kind of comes full circle again with the efficacy of creatine monohydrate supplementation on some of the brain stuff. And one of the big questions that is raised right now is, well, can it cross the blood-brain barrier? And we see some studies that say, well, maybe, and other studies that say maybe not. So the research on that's equivocal from the last that I've read on.
Yeah, from talking to Scott Forbes and Eric Rosson's done some of the studies on brain creatine. The consensus I got in from reading a lot of literature that they've put out and other researchers is that it looks like it crosses the blood-brain barrier, but you probably need higher concentrations.
Yep.
And then from talking to Dr. Rolfson, these studies are so hard to do because you can't biopsy the human brain, right? So
Right.
you're left with an MRS or some non-invasive technology, which, all that is really good and they can do some amazing stuff, but it also has certain limits that make it hard to figure out, like what was your baseline? How long do you have to run the supplement for? What is your detection error that you can even detect a difference before and after? And it
Right.
gets to be much more difficult than just sticking a Bergstrom needle in and going, "Hey, let's just measure it."
Exactly. Yeah. It's more complicated. They're all just proxy measurements at that point in time. And like I say, there is a margin of error. And you're right, that least detectable change, is it greater than what is actually a measurement error, right? So it's really important to be able to identify that.
Yeah, and that's where I originally heard of GAA through, shout out to Dave Barr, years ago. I think he might even wrote a article for TMEG on it, like well over a decade ago. And I think, don't quote me on this, certain companies, I don't know if it was Muscle Tech or other companies were starting to put it in some creatine products. And at that time, there was almost very little research on it, period. And so I remember flipping through the research 2 years ago. I do some neuro research reviews for the Carrick Institute and saw a couple articles on it. And there was another one, I think this past year too. And the argument was that maybe for muscle, it may not be better, like you mentioned, the creatine monohydrate, but they're making an argument that maybe for neuro implications, maybe we could have creatine monohydrate and maybe we could have GAA, maybe it's some combination of them. Maybe something like that could elevate brain creatine levels. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting to read that. And to your point, there is a company that does make creatine plus GAA together.
Okay.
And I saw it recently. I remembered the name off the top of my head a while ago, but it's very interesting to see what they have. So they actually combine those two. And yeah, I think with relation to the blood-brain barrier, that's one of the thoughts. But I've read on GAA recently, there is some data that suggests that maybe it does cross the blood-brain barrier supplementation. Of course, once the brain has its own supply of creatine and its own
Yep.
supply of GAA, and then once it's past the blood-brain barrier, it can actually GAA will turn into creatine. But I think that the jury's still out whether GAA itself can cross the blood-brain barrier, because it may need the same creatine transporter to be able to go through that barrier. So I think the jury's still out, but I think there's a lot of interesting research that could come from it.
Do you think there's, in the neuro case, like maybe some subcomponents that it's broken down to that could cross the blood-brain barrier and basically be reassembled again? I think of the early work on like harnessing. So they gave carnosine as a supplement and they thought, oh, wow, look, this actually increases some endurance performance. Later on, through Dr. Roger Harris and other people, they found that, oh, well, it was just disassembling it into L-histinine and beta-alanine. And it turns out your body had plenty of L-histinine and beta-alanine was the rate limiter. So we can just skip ahead and just give you beta-alanine and get a better effect.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's something to be said to that, that I think that is definitely a possibility that we could actually look into. Right. Because essentially creatine is made up of fundamental amino acids. Right. So
Right.
it could you, if you just put those together, maybe they can cross the blood brain barrier. And then there could be a limiting reagent amino acid that is creating that holdup per se.
Yeah. What are any future predictions on GAA? Do you think it'll be something the sports industry kind of jumps on? Do you think it'll wait for more research? Or if you were to speculate, what is your speculations?
I would say if you have some entrepreneur that reads some of the literature and markets it right, right, I think there's some marketability for it because it is new, it is sexy. So I think it's got some potential to be able to. In fact, maybe I'm going to start taking some investors right now and I'm going to create. No, I'm just kidding.
I was like, maybe we should chat after this call, buddy.
But no, but I think it's got some promise. Personally, though, I would like to see a little more research on it because we have very limited human data before it's marketed. But I do see it, it does have some potential for working. I would be interested in primarily some of the health metrics. Does it increase homocysteine levels? And if you do, like at what dosage do you have potential problems with? And I think that would be some of the starting point before I would feel comfortable doing it. But I think it's got some potential. I think if somebody decides to invest in it and either take the chance on the literature that's currently available, maybe markets it correctly, maybe invest some money into doing more research with it, I think it could potentially do well. Because I'm going to go back to creatine monohydrate in 1990, right?
Yeah.
Creatine monohydrate in 1990, we knew about it, but we probably knew about as much about it as we know about GAA today, right? And maybe a little bit less. And they marketed it right. And realistically, you saw creatine sales increase over the years, but it's been exponential growth over the last 5 years, 7 years, I would say. Now to the point where you're seeing women take it, you're seeing elderly take it, and it's just part of the general repertoire for most individuals. Where in the 1990s, only meatheads took it, very serious athletes, right? And that's what the market was. But between the marketing and the research that has substantiated its effectiveness and its safety, it's come a long way. So I see it personally. I think it's a little diamond in the rough and probably not a bad idea. I think the one pushback that you may get is, well, you already have creatine, so why do you need GAA? My comeback to that is, well, if I can give you the same effect for cheaper, why not?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes people, when I talk to them about creatine, are horrified that I've been taking creatine mostly on since 1995. And I always
Right.
point out to them, I'm like, yes, it's anecdotal. I could show you the freaking hundreds of pages on creatine. But if you just think and look at how many, probably billions of doses of creatine that have been consumed by people and almost very few to almost no side effects, it's interesting that people are still very worried about things that we have a lot of both anecdotal and extremely well controlled published long-term data on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny because those same people, they have no problem drinking like a fish, right?
Oh yeah, all the other stuff's fine.
Yeah.
Let your 18-year-old run full speed with another human. I don't think twice about that. I'm not
Right.
saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying Grayton's the least that worries about him. That's the least thing I'd be worried about.
Yeah. And I see, they'd have a problem eating a ton of crappy, ultra processed food in large quantities. So that's fine. But gosh, no, not a protein powder. Like you saw that article in the LA Times or not at the New York Times on protein powders, right? Are they needed? It
No, I didn't.
just came out maybe a couple weeks ago, maybe 3
Oh,
weeks ago.
geez.
It's actually a very comprehensive, and I'm going to say poorly done paper, which I was surprised about because New York Times usually does a pretty good job on a lot of
Yeah.
things. But yeah, it was very, very biased in a lot of ways.
Oh,
And it basically, the question is, are protein powders needed? And of course, the answer is you don't necessarily need it. I'm not on that
yeah.
boat, but it definitely helps. But they're certainly not detrimental.
No.
They're not, to me, if it can be the way I look at it, I almost don't look at protein powder even as a dietary supplement, even though it is, but I look at it
Convenience.
as it's a simple way to down a piece of chicken or
Yeah.
fish, or you can only eat so much of that stuff. And to me, it's like getting 50, 60 grams of protein, of my daily protein from a powder is perfectly convenient when I'm trying to consume 250 grams of protein a day, right?
Yeah. It just seems weird of all the things that they focus on that it's almost like you've been around long enough to know that even high protein diets now, every couple of years or couple of months, there'll be something else that comes out that says, oh, it's so horrible. You crazy meatheads eating 1 gram per pound of body weight, or in your case, even more than that. Those old stories, just the Brenner hypothesis of kidney damage and all that kind of stuff, that just stories get stuck in people's heads and they just don't seem to go away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you as well. And I've been taking creatine probably on and off, a lot on. Probably
Yeah.
I was maybe 16 years old. So that's 1992 for me.
Yeah.
So that's a long time to be taking that stuff. And there's been periods of time where I'm on it for over a year straight.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. Usually the time I come off is when I just run out.
Yeah, you forget. That's the reason I do. Go on vacation, I didn't bring any. Fine.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and of course the supplement industry has a shady past, is always trying to create better forms of creatine. I remember the creatine ethyl ester, where they did the little ad where they put it in a glass with clear water and they're like, look, it disappears in water, so it's more bioavailable. And I remember seeing that going, what the? One, there was almost no safety tests done on that version. Two, creatine monohydrate is extremely bioavailable. It doesn't have a bioavailability issue, but
No,
just that demo alone probably sold metric tons of it. And then talking to
absolutely.
Roger Harris about it, he said, yeah, we got kind of lucky on that. According to him, if the body had cleaved it off at a different spot, it would have turned out to be quite toxic, but it didn't. And he said something like the original companies just thought it was going to be better, released it, didn't do much of a study. Granted, this is many years ago now. And yep, and we just got lucky that it just basically was ineffective and didn't turn out to be bad. But it could have been really bad.
Oh my gosh, it's insane. Yeah, I think you and I chatted about this paper that I wrote. It came out maybe a couple of years ago, but it was on. We surveyed Amazon products that sold
Yes.
creatine. Remember?
Yeah.
And that was one of the interesting things that we saw is we looked at all of the marketing claims that were put on these things, and then we analyzed the cost of these products. And what we found is these products cost at least twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times more expensive than the creatine monohydrate. And then the claims are just outrageous. And then when you look at the evidence behind most of them, it's like there's really not a lot of evidence in a lot of these in terms of their efficacy and safety. And if there is, none of them really show that it's any more effective than the creatine monohydrate. So yeah, it's very interesting to see that information. But that's the problem with the dietary supplement industry. And I think there's a lot of good folks in the industry that do things.
Oh, yeah.
But there's also a lot of folks that just put a cloud over it and they're shady with some things. And even though I always like to say people think it's not FDA regulated, it is FDA regulated. It's just FDA regulated much differently than medications and other things, right? So it's one of those things where if you do no harm, you'll probably be fine. Once you do harm, then the FDA is going to take a look and they're going to say, hey, what's going on over there? But there's a lot of supplements that do no harm and do no good either.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a whole regulation versus enforcement issue too. It is highly illegal for you to market something as, let's say, creatine monohydrate of 5 grams, and it doesn't meet dose or something else in there. It's not meeting label claim. Is that always enforced? Are claims always enforced? Herbal products notoriously are very poor quality. Is that enforced? Is it illegal? Yes. Is it enforced? There's not the manpower to do all of that stuff, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And the reality is from a business perspective, if you have a very entrepreneurial mindset and not a very high ethical mindset,
Yeah.
it's a business that is the cost to entry level into the business, cost to enter the market is very relatively low, and the return on investment is relatively high. And all you really need is the right marketing campaign and you can kill it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I've seen most of the roadblocks are in distribution. So if you can pay someone off or have someone promoted who has a big audience or that type of thing. Unfortunately, you could promote very ineffective products and probably still do quite well, which annoys me, but
Absolutely.
because somebody's going to cash in on that. But just given enough people with questionable ethics, like someone's going to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's very common that's one of the things that we wrote in that paper. It's more I'm going to say it's more common to do that. That is more the standard in a lot of ways. Right. And some companies get picked on it, but others don't. But a lot of companies that's the way they roll, and they're doing it over and over again, and they're making a lot of money.
Yeah. And I think you've seen the new rules Amazon's put in place where it appears to be, and I don't know if this is enforced, having more traceability and inquiring companies to have lot traceability and everything to try to cut down on the number of fakes and knockoffs and all that stuff being sold on there. So hopefully that'll do some good overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important. And then you also read some of these studies that have been done, and companies place illicit compounds in products without the consumer knowing. And then you have this person taking product X. So it works awesome. I'm like, yeah, that's because it's laced with 5 grams of D-ball in there.
Yeah.
Like, of course you're growing like a weed.
Yeah. There's been various companies in the past that have been busted for doing just that. And usually the telltale sign, not always, is that the original product run was amazing. And then all of a sudden, like 4 months later, like the product, everyone's, I don't know, it's not doing the same thing.
But I would like to say that we're definitely talking some of the people that put that bad taste in people's mouth. But there's a lot of good companies that do it right.
Oh, definitely.
And that they back their products with evidence, and they stand behind their product, and they do things just the way you're supposed to. Unfortunately, that's just that there's a lot of bad guys in the race as well.
Yeah. I always tell consumers, if you're not sure, like in general, bigger name products are generally going to be better. They just have a lot more to lose. Smaller companies that are not always bad, but if they disappear tomorrow and all the owners end up in Fiji, they don't have as much to lose. And then call the company, ask for a COA, certificate of analysis. Like companies who, in my experience, who are doing all the right steps, who are doing GMP, who have traceability, who are all that stuff costs them a lot of money to do.
Yes.
And vast majority of the time, they're more than happy to explain what they're doing because they want people to be educated. They want people to buy their products. They want to show that they are doing things the right way because it's literally costing them money. And they hate all the other knockoff weirdos in the industry that just make everyone look bad.
Exactly. I agree. Yeah, it's a very interesting industry, but I said it's something that you and I have been a part of for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and you get to see all the insides and the inner workings and all the crazy monkey motion and stuff that goes in the background. But you do also get to see how legitimate companies work. And I've seen various companies make the right decision that was not beneficial for their bottom line. I've seen companies get stuck with, we'll say, in theory, many pounds of an inferior raw that came from China that they batch tested and found was inferior and did not use, and the company said it was good and they never got their money back. But to their credit, it got QC. They didn't use it because it didn't pass spec. So there are a lot of good things that happen in the industry that people also don't see.
Yeah, they don't see that part. People like to hear just they don't always like to hear the good. They want to see the juicy stuff, right?
Yeah.
People like to hear.
Yeah. Speaking of juicy stuff, that's a good transition. You're doing some stuff with the enhanced games, correct?
Yeah, that's been a very exciting adventure over the last few months. I connected with Dan Turner, who's the director of athlete health and safety for the enhanced games. And we met a little bit before the ISSN conference in June.
It's the same who gave the talk at ISSN, is that correct? Or a different guy?
It's a different guy. It's his counterpart, just Dr. Singler. Gotcha. He's the one. So that's the one that gave the talk, but they were there together. And Dr. Singler also works with the enhanced games, and he's a physician, and he's dual board certified, super sharp guy. And he's in orthopedics and I think endocrinology. So he's
his talk was great. Super interesting.
Really cool. Yeah, so I met Dan a few months before the ISSN conference, and then he let me know that, hey, I'm going to be going there. So we connected a lot more there. We spent some time chatting, went out with him and Dr. Sangler for lunch and chatted a little bit more. And then anyway, we kept in touch over the months, and then he connected with me maybe in September or something of 2024. And he asked me to see if I'd be interested in doing some consulting with them on some of the projects. So my main task was to look at what we're going to be testing the athletes on in terms of like field tests. And then we're looking at easy tests that can be done anywhere, like more field tests. And then also tests that maybe require a little bit more equipment that need to be done like in a facility. And then we're looking at different metrics as related to the athletes that are going to be studied, because the enhanced athletes that participate in the enhanced games are going to be highly tested in a lot of different ways. So these athletes will probably be the most tested athletes in the world in terms of what they're going to do. So they're going to be doing a full health risk assessment, head to toe, looking particularly at cardiovascular health, and then blood work, et cetera, making sure that the people are healthy. That's one of the main things. And then in addition to that, we're going to be looking at performance metrics. So we're identifying which performance metrics, and we're still working. It's still a work in progress in terms of what we're going to use, how we're going to be using, what's practical, what's not practical, what resources are going to be available and allocated, where it's going to be done. So I've developed like the initial proposal for the field tests. And then the second part that I'm going to be doing is consulting on, there's other people that are putting together some of the drug protocols that are going to be proposed. So I'm going to be giving some feedback in some of those particular protocols that are going to be utilized. And it's being put together by physicians and coaches actually alike, combining heads. And what's going to be cool about the enhanced games is there's going to be athletes that can, if you want to be an all natural athlete, you can compete as an all natural athlete. That's fine. Totally up to you. But they disclose obviously that there's going to be people that are enhanced there.
People who are not natural.
So you have the right to be all natural. Regardless, those people have to pass the same health screening in terms of, we want to make sure that they're healthy. There's going to be athletes that are going to be going through a protocol that's developed by the enhanced games and supervised by medical doctors and scientists from the enhanced games. And it's going to be a very specific drug protocol to enhance their performance. And then those people have to pass the same health tests and be cleared to make sure that they're healthy enough to compete. And they're going to be monitored periodically on all of these different health biomarkers and performance biomarkers. And then there's going to be another group that they do their own protocol, whatever they want to do. And I think that's still to be determined. Is it really whatever, or is there going to be a limit into things that are allowable, not allowable? So those are still topics of discussion. But what we do know for sure is even those athletes, whatever they decide to take and whatever they decide is allowed, will still have to pass that same safety criteria, because the last athlete safety is number one concern. So we want to make sure that these athletes are going to be really maximizing performance and minimizing the health risk. So we want to make sure that we're monitoring their health as much as possible and trying to mitigate any of these health risks over time. And then the second tier of the enhanced games that's really interesting is looking at the longevity piece. So using this data that we're pulling and looking as, can we apply some of these particular substances that are used to enhance muscle protein synthesis and muscle growth and strength for the general population in terms of longevity, right? So right now, for example, people with sarcopenia, it's not common protocol for you to be able to prescribe human growth hormone or testosterone or other types of androgens to counteract that, or osteoporosis, same thing. Like those are not common protocols, but
you're not walking in to get Anavar because you're getting old.
Exactly.
You might get testosterone depending upon where you go, but other ones
probably not. And those are some of the things that we kind of want to create some data for, because we can maybe look at these athletes over time, and then we can actually see, it's like, hey, look, this athletes, they're 42 years old, they're 45 years old, they're 50 years old, and they're still able to perform at a very high level. Well, why? And then we can look at some of these things. And then these are some of the things that we want to maybe open up the mind of the medical and scientific community, is in a very rigorous, scientifically tested way, with data behind it, can we actually implement some of these compounds into other protocols that they're currently not medically indicated for?
How do you think you could? So one of the things I thought in my head is if we make the assumption that X compound, we'll just say is bad and takes 20% off your life, right? This is all hypothetical. I'm just making shit up. But most of these people are doing good nutrition, are doing a lot of exercise, or doing sleep, or doing recovery. So they're have a much better lifestyle than the average American walking around. So maybe their net benefit is actually still a net benefit, even though compound X might have a higher side effect. How do you try to tease out? Because most of these are high level athletes who are doing good nutrition, who are doing good exercise, who are doing a lot of the other sort of beneficial habits. Like, how do you, I'm just trying to think in my head, like, how do you tease these out if the idea is to transfer to, say, general population? And I agree with the idea, and I'm not poo pooing it. I just think it definitely should be done. I'm just thinking mechanically, how do you do that, I guess?
I think ultimately, probably we'd have to test it in the population that it's intended to be tested. So
That would
I
be
think,
my thought too.
yes,
Eventually,
I
you have
think
to transfer and go, "Hey,
yeah,
let's take a small group of normal humans," and
right. I think you'd have to, and then, but then at the very least, then we have some of the safety profile data. Like, for example, we know, okay, like for this compound X, like at what dosage are we actually gaining the most benefit, right? Or what dosage
correct.
range, right? Are we gaining the most benefit? Because it might be individualized for each person. Some individuals may need more, some may need less. So at least you can identify what that range is. And then we could probably identify also at what dosage range do we see detriments in health outcomes. And then if you do see some of these detriments in health outcomes, how long do they last, or how can we mitigate them? Can we counteract it with maybe another compound to maybe mitigate some of those risks? So those are some of the things that, again, are conversations to be had. And just as one example, I'm going to say, like, we know that high dosages of androgenic anabolic steroids we have some evidence to show that they can increase the renin-angiotensin system, so that the ROS levels, right?
Yep.
And then we know that ROS can potentially increase blood pressure and then lead to a bunch of other cardiometabolic health detriments, right? So maybe we give a compound, right, like telmisartan, for example,
Yep.
to decrease the ROS levels. And then we may be able to see that. And then actually studying that. There's a lot of bodybuilders already doing that
Oh yeah.
to mitigate some of the risks. But you can actually look at some of these profiles, and then you can actually get more data collected, and then you can see if it works.
Yeah, because it's the hard part too is it's not linear. Even if we take like testosterone, which we have a fair amount of data in terms of compounds, we know if you just keep taking escalating doses of testosterone, your risk and reward ratio starts becoming more skewed, right? At some point when you go up high enough in dosages, you're not getting a one-to-one beneficial effect, and your risk is starting to become more escalated. It's just at what point is that for what individual? Now you combine it with other compounds, and that's what makes it a very interesting problem too, because it's not this simple linear one-to-one relationship all the time.
Exactly. And it's all so different for each individual. There's a lot of
Sure.
individual variability in that, as there is in a lot of things. So I think it's important. That's one thing that I always like to point out is that, and you see this all the time in a lot of different ways. So you have some bodybuilders, for example, that you give them like a little bit of anabolic steroids, maybe, I don't know, 200, 400 milligrams a week, which is a relatively lower dosage,
Yeah.
and they grow like crazy. And then you have other individuals that you need to give them 10 times that or 5 times that to get even a remotely similar effect, or maybe they won't even get the same effect, right? And similarly, you have some individuals where that same 200 or 300 milligrams a week dosage will create extreme side effects.
Oh yeah.
And then you have other people who can handle 1,000 milligrams, 1,500 milligrams a week, and then they have minimal side effects. And then you have all the people in between. So the analogy I like to use is like that. We all know that 100-year-old lady who smoked and drank her whole life, never exercised, and ate ultra processed foods, and she lived to be over 100, right? And that's just, and then other people, like they have an Oreo and they're diabetic. So
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah. The side effect thing is what kind of blew me away, like seeing some blood work from people who may, let's say, other countries self-report what I would consider some pretty crazy dosages of stuff. Me expecting to see their blood work is going to look like a complete train wreck, and looking at their blood work going, other than a little low HDL, I don't know, it doesn't look that bad, which is bonkers. And you see someone else on one compound at a moderate dose, and you see everything just go
You,
go to shit.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. People, you get aromatization at different levels. And yeah, like you said, it's some people, I was like, oh, your HDL went down a little bit, but you're still at 42. It went from 55 to 42. It's still like within normal range. And then you have other people, it's like
Single
you take the
digits.
same dose. Yeah, your HDL went down to 10,
Yeah.
and then your LDL went up to 300, right?
Uh,
Pretty crazy.
but I've seen that stuff too on even just a ketogenic diet. Like vast majority of stuff I've seen on a ketogenic diet, like no issues, no crazy blood work. But I've seen enough individual cases now, and it's not very common, where I had one person where their blood lipids just went wacky, and they were not overweight. They're generally metabolically healthy. They would go off a ketogenic diet within we tested them every 4 to 6 weeks. It would normalize. It would go back to normal, go back on the ketogenic diet. Blood lipids just go absolutely bonkers again. Was that
Wow.
definitely not the norm, and
But
it's
you
pretty
see it.
rare. I've only seen it twice, but it's just fascinating. It's like you just wonder, like, what's going on with that person?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, and the same goes through with a lot of these drugs. And those are some of the things that we kind of want to tease out and at least have some normal type data. So what's cool right now is everything's being done. We're trying to figure out, and I say, well, we, the Enhanced Games folks,
Yeah.
a very small part of that, very small part of that. There's some great leaders that are leading the way. But yeah, the Enhanced Games is looking at currently where they're going to be held. They're looking at either later 2025 or sometime in 2026 in terms of a city. Is it going to be in the United States or in another part of the world? And then even running these tests. So right now we're trying to look at what type of institutional review board will actually review all of these
Right.
calls and allow it. So, but everything's being done legitimately so that it can be a legitimate scientific study. We can collect legitimate scientific data, and then we can actually analyze this data over the years to come.
Yeah, and I would imagine even just something like location, because you hard time believing it would be in the US just because of the legality of it. Again, I could be wrong. But then if you're going to other countries, then if you want to do all this testing and technology, and what are you trying to do? You've got all these blood samples, you've got urine samples, like just the logistics of it. You can't do it on a desert island in the middle of nowhere. You know what I mean? You need technology, and you need things, you need accessibility to have them transported, whatever. There's a lot of, I'd imagine, just sheer logistics that go into the planning of it.
Yeah, and those are some of the hurdles that are trying to go over those particular and tackle. So one thing is, if, for example, if we actually have an IRB approved, theoretically, if you're part of this study, you should be able to take your compound anywhere in the world, even in the United States, right? Because
Right.
you're part of a study, you're not doing anything illegally. It's like
Yep.
you're getting it prescribed from whatever study you're participating in, and then you can bring it in accordingly. So those are some of the things that we're trying to carry, but obviously that lends itself. So like the IRB is probably, I'm 99% sure it's not going to be approved here in the United States. It's going to be
Yeah,
in
I
another
would
country.
be shocked.
Yeah, it'll be in another location where there's a little bit more liberty to do those types of studies.
Yeah, because I think in the UK, did they declassify like steroids in general, or was it more just a decriminalization compared to the US?
I'm not, I know that they had some changes, but I'm not too familiar with
Yeah.
over there. And actually, this was one of the things that they were talking about at the Enhanced Games, that there is rumor that they may be at least reclassifying testosterone and anabolic steroids here in the United States.
Yeah, I heard that too. Rick was telling me that too. Yeah, Rick
Yeah, so
Collins.
that it's not at the same level. I think right now it's a Schedule 3 compound,
Yeah.
and that way it doesn't carry the same issues as you would with other compounds. Because right now I've talked to Rick Collins, and some of the things that he's such a great attorney.
Yeah.
And some of the things that he tells you is like, yeah, defended guys where they have whatever 2 vials of testosterone or whatever compound they have, and then in the courts, they'll say, "Oh, that's you have so much possession, so much stuff that you're actually intent to sell," and it's like, this is
Yeah.
for personal use, but they don't understand how the things work, right? It's like 2 vials of that. No, that's just personal use, and I'm going to use that in probably, I don't know, 4 or 8 weeks, right? And the
Yeah.
personal use. I'm not gonna. That's not intent to sell, but the way that some of the laws transfer over, that's enough to really carry. I mean, you have 100 pills of an oral compound, and this, oh, you have intent to distribute this. No, like that's just like a 10-week supply or an 8-week supply of that compound.
Yeah. You hear these stories of professional bodybuilders who are getting ready for the Olympia is the one story I heard. Who knows if it's true or not, but some of the competitors tend to be very much on the OCD side. So they want to make sure they have everything ready. A lot of them want to make sure whatever ancillary compounds they're going to use, they want to make sure that they have them 4, 6 months out. And Rick was telling me that if you happen to get rated 6 months out, it's only for your personal use. But the other side, exactly what you said, is going to argue because of the sheer volume that you've accumulated that your intent to deal, and that's a whole different jurisdiction within the law, and it just gets super, super messy real fast.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's something to consider. But you're right. If you're preparing for the World Bodybuilding
Right.
Championship, it's like you don't want to run out of stuff.
Right.
That's the last thing
Find
you
out
don't
4
want.
weeks out. Oops, I goofed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't afford that.
Do you think with the enhanced games we wrap up, do you think records will be broken? What is your prediction on that? Because they are doing events that are in the Olympics, right? I think it's a lot of track and field and other common events.
Yeah, and that is actually a good question. So the some of the initial events, they want it to be very objective in nature. So
Yeah.
it's going to be like some sort of sprint event, so like a 100, 200 meter dash, some sort of like throwing event, like a hammer throw, shot put, discus type thing, some sort of jumping event, like a long jump, high jump, triple jump type thing. So those three will be run. They're also going to be doing potentially like a strongman type stuff where it's like, again, numbers, right? So how much did you
Yep.
lift? And then a swimming's going to be big too. And it's going to
Oh,
be
interesting.
like a swim sprint,
Yeah.
like a 50-meter swim sprint, which would be interesting. So those are, they've talked about doing other events like maybe gymnastics and whatnot, fighting, but, and those are, I think, are on the radar. But the one issue with them is there's a subjective component to that,
Yep.
right? So like those are all judged, I guess, in boxing or MMA fighting. If you knock the person out, it's not, it's
Right.
subjective.
But if it
But a
goes to
lot
a
of times go
decision.
by decision, right?
Right.
So that leaves that subjective component. So, but to answer your question, I'm curious to see what will happen. I think they're paying a lot of money. If they break a world record, they're rewarding the athletes very well if they break a world record.
That's what I heard. It was not an inconsequential. I heard could be up to $1 million. I don't know what the actual number was, but it was significant.
Yeah, it's a big chunk of change. So I think there's definitely motivation there. But where I kind of see us maybe not on these records is number one is, are the world's ultimately best athletes that are being paid that we're seeing in the Olympics, are they willing to switch over
Yep.
to compete in the enhanced games in an enhanced fashion? Although with the caveat saying, we're assuming that these people are not enhanced already, right?
Right.
Just because they're tested and they pass a drug test, I'm not convinced that, there may be some that are perfectly
Sure.
natural, but I have the sneaking suspicion that a large percentage of those people that are classified as quote unquote all natural are not all natural,
Yeah.
right? They're already taking insulin or some sort of other performance enhancement compound that is definitely helping their performance. So
Even ones that might not be detectable currently.
exactly, exactly. So I think these folks. So if that's the case, if they're already taking something that's working, maybe we won't see the world records that have been there. But I mean, I would love to see like a 9.4 or a 100 dash. Like that would be fantastic to see that. So I think there's a possibility, though. Again, you're going to have athletes that maybe are going to switch sides, and they're like, hey, they're going to pay these athletes a good amount of money. So, but again, is it the same as having a $25 million Nike contract? I don't know.
Yeah, and if you openly compete at the enhanced games, could you ever go back to compete at the Olympics again?
Well, that's the nice thing that they did, which I thought was brilliant, is they are allowing athletes that are clean to compete. So
Right.
they can still be tested, part of WADA testing like normal.
Yep.
So so they have to pass the test, and then they're just going to show up and compete at the enhanced games without compromise. So as long as they're passing the normal WADA testing, they're technically clean and they're going to be able to compete, and they can compete really at both. Now, if the Olympics will allow that or not, that's another question to be had, because I know there's been a lot of, there was a New York Times article on the enhanced games recently
Mm.
that came out too. And a lot of folks from the Olympics that organized that, they almost don't even want to comment. They're like,
Oh yeah.
we don't even want to hear about it. It's because they have a whole different philosophy on sport. But to me, I think I love the idea of the enhanced games just because it really opens up what performance is. And at the end of the day, it's like, we're not pulling wool over people's eyes, right? I think we're really just saying is, hey, like, this is what it takes to compete at the highest level. And we're being as transparent as possible. And not only that, but we're also being as safe as possible, because I think right now what's happening in a lot of these tested sports is it's being just hidden under the rug that these athletes are not using stuff, when in reality, a lot of them are. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them
Yeah. Yeah.
probably are. And because it's not open and it's so taboo, now you really can't openly test their health or all of these different biomarkers, because if they do, they're going to be outed, and that's not ideal for them.
Yeah. And also, the organizational bodies have a vested interest because people want to pay to see records broken,
Yep.
but they also have the ethical dilemma of, we want to make sure that it's a fair and clean playing field, which I understand and I actually agree with. But if you look at sports like cycling, the main reason I would say cycling is probably a lot cleaner than what it was many years ago. Their times are worse,
Right.
unfortunately. And that probably tells me that their testing is probably more effective now. Watts per kilo, all the numbers that are well documented are well below when it was very well known that cycling was probably one of the most dope sports on the face of the planet at one point in time.
Right. Yeah. If you go back to 2003,
Yep.
2004, right?
Yeah. So it's this weird, interesting thing. I've heard this from athletes that have always been clean and tested a bunch of times or very talented, that they feel pressured because they feel like they're competing against other people who are not. And so then they're stuck in this quandary of, yes, I would be breaking the rules, but if I don't really maybe go to the next level, I may not qualify for the Olympics. Or if I do, I'm going to be 10th versus maybe third. So they're stuck in this kind of weird area also because of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think it's a tough decision to be in. And for me as an athlete, it's like, it's almost hard not to cross over when you know what the benefit is, because everybody's so talented there, right?
Mhm.
And kind of a I'll say a joke, but I'll say, how can you detect who's juicing in the Olympic Games? And it's those that are wearing the medals.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if you make it to the Olympic finals or even the semifinals in the 100-meter dash, so you're one of the top 8 or 16 runners in the world, a lot of those people, maybe number 16, number 15, number 14, maybe they're perfectly clean. They don't have the resources to be able to do it, whatever the case may be. And then you give them a little bit of help, and who knows what they can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And what my prediction, I don't know if you would agree, is that it'd be interesting to see, like, track and field would be great. So if you could do 100, a 200, a 400 meter, a 1600 meter, my prediction is until you get to longer events like marathon, half marathon, the biggest uptick in performance you would see would be in the 100, 200, where it's more, yes, it's technique based, but strength and power, you'd probably see a bigger transfer to performance. And then obviously at the half marathon level, EPO, things that increase endurance, you'll probably see it there. My prediction is that maybe your 400 meter or your 1600 meter times may not be that different. But maybe your 100-meter times, like you said, maybe they're running like a friggin' 9.4, 9.5 or something there.
Yeah, I think, and there's something to be said to that, because looking at the energy systems, right? if you're looking at maybe even the 5K, 10K, EPO would probably help in
Sure.
regard. But, and you're right, probably the 400, 800, 1600, you're going to get some help, but is it going to be really that different?
Right.
Maybe not, but probably in the 100 and 200. Yeah, for sure. Shot put, discus, definitely say yes. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time here. I really appreciate it. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, you can follow me on Instagram at Dr. GFit spelled out. So Dr. DOCTOR GFit. And then I also have a YouTube channel. You can just look for me there. And I'm trying to create a little more content on that guy. I have a few things up there, but I'm trying to create more this year and put some things up. And then you can also just Google me and find me. I'm a associate dean at Cal State San Bernardino, and you can find me at CSUSB here, part of the College of Natural Sciences. So easy to find me.
And you currently don't have any grad students, correct? Or were you guys working on more of a graduate type program? I can't remember either way on that.
No, we don't have a grad program, and I'm not in the teaching component anymore.
Oh, okay.
I still have my hands in some research, but I'm collaborating with some other folks at different universities. But in my lab, I had a small research project that we're doing, but for our kinesiology program here, we actually just have an undergrad program, and we do a lot of research with our undergrads, which is actually a really cool thing. But we don't have a graduate program here for kinesiology.
Got it. And most of the undergrads are exercise phys, I would assume, kinesiology for 4-year degree, correct?
Yeah. So they're here for a 4-year degree. Yeah. So we have 4 different concentrations. We have an exercise science track. We have an allied health professions track. We have a pedagogy track, and we have a health promotion track. So a lot of our students, and really in all 4, that they'll participate in some of the research. But yeah, luckily we have some really cool undergrads, and a lot of them that come here, actually, I tell them they're pretty lucky because I've had a lot of undergrads come out with a publication out of here. I'm like,
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm like, I didn't have a publication as an undergrad.
Yeah. No, that's super cool, especially if people are listening. Any undergrads where you can get even just some limited research experience, definitely do it. It's something will serve you well in the future, no matter what profession you end up in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Get present at conferences and speak to other people, meet other people that are brighter than you. And that's the way you grow. So I love being around other smart people because you just learn so much from everybody.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'd encourage people to check out the YouTube channel and all the great stuff you have on Instagram too. You always have good stuff there, which is awesome to see.
All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Nelson. It's good chatting with you.
Yeah, it's good to chat with you. Thank you so much.
All right.
Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nelson. On this podcast, we talk about all things to increase performance, add muscle, improve body composition, and do all this in a flexible framework without destroying your health. Today on the podcast, my good buddy, Dr. Guillermo Escalante, and we are chatting about some really cool stuff. A 2-part series here. We're talking about the compound GAA. Is this the next creatine? Now, again, you've probably heard about everybody making claims about this form of creatine, this supplement's the next creatine. Well, it turns out GAA is sort of a precursor to creatine and may have some other super interesting benefits. I've been following this work on GAA for quite some time. Shout out to my buddy, Dave Barr. Man, probably a decade and a half ago, he was the first guy who ever mentioned this to me. And I've just been one of those things in the background. I sit around and read research for fun. So I've been keeping my eye on that. I did a research review on it for the Carrick Institute this past year in their neuro research review. So if you want full details on that, was one of the studies that was included there. But I wanted to get Dr. Escalante here to talk about GAA. Is it the next creatine? What is it? What are some of the potential benefits? What do we know? What do we not know? We also talked about the supplement industry just overall. Is the supplement industry regulated or not? So I'll make you listen to the podcast for that answer. And then we switched up and we started talking about the enhanced games, which is coming up pretty fast. What exactly is it? How are they going to look at health and performance metrics? What are they really trying to do? What are some of the potential changes that could happen in terms of regulation of drugs and PEDs? What are even the kind of ethics of doing something like that? So really fun conversation. Huge thanks to him for coming on to the podcast. Make sure to check out all of his great stuff. We'll put a link to his Instagram below, which he's always constantly sharing great stuff. And then both of us will be at the International Society of Sports Nutrition Conference. If you are around or want to go to that, I would highly recommend it. If you're interested in exercise physiology, nutrition, sports supplementation, great conference. Probably one of my favorites of the year. I think I've only missed 2 years in 16 years or something like that. So I'm not presenting this year, just hanging out, getting to chat with everyone there. And we also have a sponsorship here from Element. If you're interested in tasty electrolytes, check them out below. It is an affiliate link. And then also my friends over at Tecton Ketones. So if you're looking for a way to bump your ketone levels up without having to do a ketogenic diet, I would highly recommend you check them out. They've got some really cool stuff coming out very soon. As soon as it is public knowledge, I will share all of that with you. But look for some cool stuff from them around probably the June time frame. So thank you so much for listening. As always, if you want more information from me, you can get onto the Insider newsletter. I'll put a link to it down below. And enjoy this podcast with Dr. Guillermo Escalante. Thank you so much for listening to the Flex Diet Podcast. Huge thanks to Dr. Guillermo Escalante for talking all about GAA. And mark my words, you will see a ton of stuff on GAA coming up later this year. So you can say, hey, I heard it on this podcast first. I don't know if all the stuff on GAA will be positive or negative, but it'll be interesting to see where it goes. And also, like we said at the onset of the show, if you're interested in electrolytes, check out my friends over at Element. If you're interested in ketones, check out my friends over at Tecton below. I am a scientific advisor, full disclosure, to Tecton and an ambassador for them and for Element. So thank you so much. More information from me, make sure to get onto the Insider newsletter. I'll put that link below. It's free to join. Any questions, just hit me up there. Thank you again for listening to this podcast. We really appreciate it. Tons of great stuff coming up. Dr. Mike Ormsey is coming up very soon. We also got Anthony talking all about peptides. Got Dr. Patel talking about a new potential test for looking at mitochondria. Jordan Payne all about the use of IVs and much, much more. So thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. If you do us a favor, hit the old subscribe, all that wonderful stuff to help us with the algorithm. And we'll talk to all of you next week. Thank you so much for listening to the Flex Diet Podcast. Huge thanks to Dr. Guillermo Escalante for talking all about GAA. And mark my words, you will see a ton of stuff on GAA coming up later this year. So you can say, hey, I heard it on this podcast first. I don't know if all the stuff on GAA will be positive or negative, but it'll be interesting to see where it goes. And also, like we said at the onset of the show, if you're interested in electrolytes, check out my friends over at Element. If you're interested in ketones, check out my friends over at Tecton below. I am a scientific advisor, full disclosure, to Tecton and an ambassador for them and for Element. So thank you so much. More information from me, make sure to get onto the Insider newsletter. I'll put that link below. It's free to join. Any questions, just hit me up there. Thank you again for listening to this podcast. We really appreciate it. Tons of great stuff coming up. Dr. Mike Ormsey is coming up very soon. We also got Anthony talking all about peptides. Got Dr. Patel talking about a new potential test for looking at mitochondria. Jordan Payne all about the use of IVs and much, much more. So thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. If you do us a favor, hit the old subscribe, all that wonderful stuff to help us with the algorithm. And we'll talk to all of you next week.
What do you suppose they call that? A novelty act? I don't know, but it wasn't too bad. Well, that's a novelty.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.